My mother set dishes on the table with quiet ceremony, chipped plates clattering on the wooden surface. The room was too warm, filled with the scent of garlic and simmering beans, trying to soften the edges of the mood. Outside, Curitiba's twilight pressed against the window, heavy with autumn drizzle. I sat wedged on the bench between cousins, my knees jammed against the table leg. The voices around me rose and fell, a chorus of weather complaints, prices at the Mercado, and whispered gossip crackling like static. But I knew I'd been dreading this dinner since I got home from work. I could feel my father's gaze burning through me from across the table, his fingers drumming soundlessly near his glass. When he finally spoke, it silenced every fork and knife in the room. "I went to see you today, Daniel," he said. He never raised his voice, but in our family silence was the sharpest blade. "But there's no work there. Only scraps of wood, dust, and you pretending." My aunt pressed her lips together. My mother hovered with the serving spoon, her hand trembling just enough for a drop of sauce to bead and fall. I tried to breathe, to steady the trembling in my chest. "It's work, Pi, I'm building something." He didn't even let me finish. "Building, playing with wood, you mean?" He turned to the rest of them, his hand slicing the air. "Tell me, is this a job, to waste years making nothing, hoping someone will buy a toy violin?" A few nervous snickers drifted from my uncle's side. My cousin Carla hid a smirk behind her napkin. "It's not a toy, Pi. You know I've been apprenticing, learning the craft." My voice cracked. The back of my eyes prickled with tears, but I blinked them away. "You know what I do every day? I fix boilers. I work with my hands too, but I feed this family." He jabbed a gnarled finger into the table. "You want to work with wood, build furniture, at least then we could sit on it." Cousin Felipe, never missing a chance, piped up. "You keep saying you'll make the perfect violin, bring glory to Curitiba. Maestro Daniel, born for the concert hall." The laughter was louder this time. I looked at my mother, she didn't meet my eyes. She spooned beans onto my plate with a kind of apology. Her quiet was a plea, one I'd begun to hate. "Don't argue, accept. If you don't fight, maybe it'll pass." But my dream was stubborn. Ever since I'd met old Senora Villa at the luthier's shop downtown, I'd been obsessed with the curves of spruce and maple, the magic that lived inside wood and gut strings. I'd spent years sanding, shaping, failing, starting over, saving for tools one polenta at a time. It mattered more than pride or comfort. I put my fork down carefully. "Soon you'll see I'll prove you wrong. When you hear my violins with your own ears." My father snorted. "When that day comes, I will eat this table." The laughter was cruel, but I tried to stand unbent. That was all I had left. After dinner, I washed the dishes, hands moving in numb rhythm, flannel shirt stuck to my back with sweat. My mother reached across me once, a fleeting touch on my shoulder. "Eat, my son, don't leave hungry," she whispered, but I already was. Hungrier than I'd ever been. Every morning before work, cleaning offices for half the minimum wage, I hurried to the borrowed corner of the old Avila workshop. Senor Avila was nearly blind, fingers riddled with arthritis, but he let me sweep and sand in exchange for his wisdom. His voice crawled from the darkness with an impatient fondness. "Careful, Daniel, the wood's grain is like a river. Swim with it, not against." The workshop was windowless, filled with the tang of wood shavings and glue. My breath fogged the cracked glass jars. I loved the silence there, broken only by the hiss of a chisel on maple. It was a poor man's temple. Other apprentices came and went, dreaming of steady carpentry or quick money fixing guitars. They'd glance at me, still trying after all these years, and shake their heads. At night, I'd trudge home through the drizzle, violin plans folded in my pocket. Sometimes, if the clouds cleared, I'd sit in the square, listening to the distant echo of a symphony leaking from an upstairs window. It was a dose of hope, just enough to keep me going. The months dragged on and the jeers at home bore deeper. My father would come in from work with oil on his skin and a growl in his throat. "When will you give up? Can't you see you're embarrassing yourself?" My uncle called me Daniel the Dreamer. The laughter changed, cooled, became routine. Living in Curitiba, surrounded by people too proud to hope or too tired to try, you learn to swallow shame. I did every single day. One winter, Avila died. I came into the shop one morning and found him slumped over his work, as if he'd only dozed, hands curled around the unfinished scroll of a cello. His son Mateo sold the workbenches. I salvaged a box of Avila's crude tools, some wood, and fled. My workshop became our laundry alcove behind the kitchen, hemmed in by laundry lines and the constant drip from a rusted tap. My mother let me be. I worked late into the night shaping air and silence out of the rough wood. Neighbors muttered, joked that I was farming sawdust, but I didn't care anymore. I took solace in the feel of the sandpaper, the way the belly of the violin responded to the lightest touch. One day my father caught me fitting purfling. He watched a while, then shook his head. What will you do with it? Sell to ghosts. He didn't wait for my answer. Still, I labored on. During the day, I cleaned toilets in a granite office tower. I came home to splintered fingers and a relentless ache in my spine. Sometimes I thought about burning everything, freeing myself from the weight of hope, but that first violin was close. I could feel it when I ran my hands over the gentle arch of the wood. There was music hiding, waiting to be woken. I finished it after more than 2 years. It wasn't beautiful, my hand faltered and the scroll bore a scar from a slipped gouge, but it sounded. When I drew a bow across its strings, I felt the note vibrate in my chest, filling the tiny room with trembling possibility. I left it trembling on my bedside table and cried. The next day I took it to Señor Rodriguez, a violin teacher who had sometimes shown kindness in our church choir. I waited hours in the front room staring at the posters of dead composers. His verdict was gentle but firm, the sound was honest if raw. If I could make more better ones, he said, he might take one on consignment. It was all I needed. Years crawled by. I patched together a small clientele, a girl in Santa Felicidad whose father played for the university, a shy conservatory student, a cellist with a cheap German bow and hope to match. Each time I finished a new instrument, I heard older Villa in my ear, with the river, Daniel. The work brought small money, then a little more. It wasn't much, but it was my own. Still, at home I was a ghost. My father barely spoke to me, my cousins jeered. I learned to let my dignity shelter my hurt, a silent shield. I'd left them behind in a way, but I wanted always to return successful, proved right. Not out of pride, but to lay my burden down in front of them and say, see. Everything changed one September when Maestro Antonini, from the city orchestra, came into the shop. Someone had told him about the stubborn boy who makes violins from nothing. He laughed, but he stayed to try one. I watched his face as he played, a flicker, then something like surprise. He asked careful questions, took 2 samples. Within months he ordered more, one for a principal violinist, one to auction at a gala. Overnight I was besieged. Musicians trickled in from Florianopolis, Sao Paulo, even Buenos Aires. My name grew little by little, word by word. I moved out, rented a tiny studio near the botanical garden, let the silence above the city fuel my craft. When the first articles appeared, the young luthier of Curitiba, my mother called, whispering through tears, they're reading about you at the market, Daniel. My father never called. For years my rage and longing churned inside. I worked better, faster. My instruments grew in reputation and beauty. Once I saw my cousin Felipe on the street while delivering a cello. He just nodded, unsure whether to laugh or beg for introduction. But still I dreamed of coming home, of a moment when the scales would fall from every eye. I wanted more than vindication, I wanted family. So I plotted, I waited. Then the city orchestra announced a free autumn concert in Praça Tiradentes. Antonini himself would play solo using a violin of mine. A journalist had arranged a pre-concert interview in which he promised the finest violin in Brazil, handmade here by Curitiba's own Daniel Perquera. I sent invitations. I begged my mother to come, pressed tickets into my father's hand at Sunday lunch, ignored his grumbled, "We'll see if work allows." I invited every uncle, cousin and neighbor, each person who had ever watched me with that cruel little smile. The afternoon of the concert, the sky threatened rain. The square bristled with folding chairs, dusk creeping in around the trees. Vendors hawked popcorn and brigadeiros. My chest crawled with nerves and hope so sharp it burned. Backstage, Antonini found me pacing, clutching the violin. He smiled at my shaking hands. "This is the one, Daniel, the Orpheus." I nodded, unable to speak. He lifted the violin, tuned a string and glanced up. "I will take care." "Your family is here." I nodded again and he patted my shoulder. "They will hear, don't worry." I peered past the curtains. There they were, my mother in her best shawl, clutching my father's arm with white knuckles. My father stared at the stage, impassive. My uncle and cousins exchanged jokes behind him. Carla fiddled with her phone, bored. Floodlights washed the crowd in gold. The orchestra tuned. I felt my heart rise, thudding in my throat. Suddenly there was a hush. Antonini strode to center stage, nodded to the audience and raised my violin. The first notes quivered in the humid evening, clear, mellow, impossibly rich. The sound wound around the trees over the crowd, settling on their shoulders like grace. It moved people. I saw a child in blue wipe her eyes, saw couples lean together, rendered silent. When the solo passage swelled, Antonini glanced into the wings, his smile proud as any father's. The music soared. My stomach twisted, but there was no pain now, only awe. I let the notes draw out every year I'd spent scraping glue off a villa's floor, every insult at my family's table, every night spent doubting my hands. When he finished, the applause was a wave. The conductor gestured for me to step out, Antonini beckoned, and suddenly I was blinded by stage lights, trembling as I faced the crowd. Somewhere someone shouted my name. I looked for my family. There they were, stunned, my uncle and cousins open-mouthed, my mother weeping openly. Even my father stood, his face thunderstruck, hands awkwardly pressed together in applause. The surprise, the proof left them speechless. It was not words. It wasn't business, it was the sound itself, undeniable, irrefutable, singing out in the night. He made this. Afterward, people shuttled past, grasping my hands, congratulating me, pressing for commissions. I smiled, accepting it as if in a dream, but I watched my father, silent, stunned, step forward through the dispersing crowd. He stood before me, alone. Under the harsh white lights, he looked smaller than I remembered. He tilted his head, stared at my hands, at the violin in its case. He swallowed, voice rough. "That was your work." I nodded, my hands, my wood, all of it. He said nothing for a long moment, then a crooked smile pulled at his lips. "Strong enough to feed a family." I nodded again, prouder now, strong enough for many. He put his hand on my shoulder. It was a heavier gesture than applause, heavier than praise. I felt the years melt between us, the wall coming down. My mother pressed against my side. "You did it, Daniel, we heard it, we saw." There were tears in her eyes. I pressed my forehead to hers. My cousins and aunts clustered, embarrassed, quick to join the winning side. Felipe clapped me on the back. Carla gushed about famous musicians she'd read about. For a moment, their scorn faded, replaced with something like pride, a poor mask for regret, but I accepted it. As the evening closed, rain misted over the square, the lights blurred. We walked home slowly, for once, my family close around me. My father carried the violin case, careful, reverent. He said little, but I caught him glancing at me when he thought I didn't see. The old shame was gone, replaced by something gentler, humbler. At home, we sat together at the scarred kitchen table. The air was warm now with acceptance, with something like love. For the first time in years, I was not alone at this table. I belonged. Later, as I packed up my tools to return to the studio, my father lingered by the door. He cleared his throat, awkward. "Maybe you can teach me how you work with the wood, so I know what I always mocked." I nodded, chest aching with something like forgiveness. Months passed, then years, my work grew. But it was never that night's applause I craved. It was the blessing of being seen, of coming home and finding the hurt washed away. Even now, as I shape a new violin under the gentle hum of city rain, I remember the sound of my father's voice, quiet, dignified, amazed, as he told my aunts and uncles, "My son, he made that." And in that echo, I find peace.